This is Legacy Battle. Make sure you hit that subscribe button or whatever you're listening on. I'm Michael Adams, creator of Legacy Battle. My panelists tonight from the Gridiron Battle Zone, Brian King. From the Director of Operations for the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame, Scott Crawford. From Ball State Athletics, Paul Havicott. We're joined tonight by a special guest. He's a former Major League Baseball starting pitcher. Spent his entire career at the Philadelphia Phillies. Check this stat out. Career fielding percentage, perfect. 1.000. That's pretty incredible. After retiring as a player, he became the chairman of Combs Capital Partners and also became an analytics guru, at least in my opinion, for player development and draft analysis. He's worked with pitchers, quarterbacks, and we're definitely going to ask him about that in the Q&A. So we got pitcher Pat Combs here tonight. Pat, thank you for joining us.
Hey, great to be here, Michael. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. So tonight we're going to be debating the greatest World Series winners of 2010 to 2019. If you've seen our prior shows, we've done the 80s, 90s, and the 2000s. So we've been working our way up here. And as always, afterwards, we'll have a Q&A with Pat about his career. But we're going to start this out with the 2012 San Francisco Giants.
Yeah, that's my team. I think the best team of that decade, the best World Series winning team. I mean, they were in the middle of winning 3 out of 5 World Series. Easily team of the decade. But the 2012, I mean, they swept the Tigers 4 straight, not even a competition for them. Their ERA is 1.49. The Tigers' ERA was 4.11. They just shut down the Tigers, and you think, well, were the Tigers any good? Well, the Tigers had 4 hitters that hit 300 in the regular season, and 5 of their starters with an ERA under 4 in the regular season, and the Giants swept them. So the Giants had everything under control that series. Sandoval, the big panda guy, was MVP. And their starters were just untouchable in the World Series. A 1.78 ERA led by that guy who's got to be like the pitcher of that half that decade, Madison Bumgarner. And if you think about some of the guys the Tigers had on their team, I mean, they had the best 2 starting pitchers, probably 2 future Hall of Famers, in Verlander and Scherzer. And they crushed them to a 7 ERA, where in the regular season, those 2 guys had a 3.3 ERA. So Verlander and Scherzer didn't have it, and the Giants hit them all over the place. And that's why I think, the Giants sweeping the Tigers and sweeping a good Tigers team is the best.
So, Pat, we kind of look at the Giants roster. There weren't a lot of big names there. I think Posey was there already, and Bumgarner, of course. They kind of flew under the radar and go in there, and they were expected to lose. If I recall correctly, Detroit was picked to win that series. So, what are your thoughts on the 2012 Giants? And, I mean, Bumgarner and in the playoffs, what do you think of him?
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those situations where, great pitching that was on, overcame the bats of the Tigers. And so, I think there's a lot of history of great pitching winning those series, especially when those guys are pitching as well as the Giants staff did at that time. I remember Baumgartner was just unhittable. Lincecum had a great series. And so, and I think the other part of that too was just the presence that the Giants had coming off all those playoff years. You had some really battle-hardened veterans guys that had been through the fire, in previous playoff series. So I know the Tigers came in as the hotter team at that moment. Probably the reason they were, picked to win that series, but that pitching for the Giants was just too much. And as we often see, especially in playoff games, right, how important pitching is, how it can take over a game and dominate. And certainly the Giants did that. So, great team. The 2012 Giants coming off of, again, as Scott pointed out, some really strong playoff years previous to that. And I think those guys just learned a lot from those experiences. And you get into those, you get into a World Series and you've got that kind of playoff, presence under your belt. Boy, that's a huge advantage.
How does a starting pitcher, let's take somebody like Curt Schilling or as we mentioned, Baumgartner. They're very good in the regular season. I mean, they're all-star caliber players. But guys like them, when they get to the playoffs, they're unhittable. They take it up a notch. Like we see other pitchers that just get pounded. I mean, is there any reason that you might know of for that as being a former pitcher?
No, I think there's just a history of guys like that enjoy that role. They kind of had the feeling of I'm going to put the club on my back and we're just going to go out and win. And, certainly when I played with Kurt, that was the attitude that he had. He had the ability to take it up a notch and really, you just watch his performances in the playoffs, and he just showed up big when those circumstances happened. And, I think of today, like guys that, Scherzer and Verlander for sure, those are those types of pitchers, right? They just show up on those big days and they're at their best. And so, yeah, it's hard to pinpoint behaviorally or what it is that causes that. But, you just watch guys that have a history of doing that. I mean, back in my day, it was like watching, Tom Glavine and Greg Maddux and Smoltz do the same thing, right? It was like when playoff time hit, those guys were at their best. And, man, you had to have an offense that could really handle that type of pitching, and especially when those guys at that time were getting 2 or 3 inches off the plate. So those guys were hard to hit. When they're on, they're great, they're dominating, and then they still get, pitches off the plate called for them. It was just difficult situations for hitters.
Let's go 2016 Chicago Cubs.
Yes, that's my team of destiny here. I've been at Wrigley Field since 1916, and then in 2016, they were coming off a third place 2015 season, and in 16 they posted a record of 103-58, winning their division. And some pieces kind of started falling in place for these guys under the wing of Joe Madden, former skipper of my beloved Rays. The Cubs kind of clicked together and put together a great run in 16 where everything seemed to fall into place. So piece one, Joe Madden, getting him after the 2014 season, he was sort of known as like a player's coach, somebody thinking outside the box, zen, a lot of stories about him and how to motivate players. So that kind of changed the dynamic of the, stagnant Cubs there. And then piece two, you get Yale graduate Theo Epstein, who was tasked together, putting together a championship team. He had already worked wonders there in Chicago or in Boston with the Red Sox and broke down their historical demons. And then they had a great piece that Chris Bryant came there in 2015. I think it was his rookie season. He had made the All-Star game in his first season, named Rookie of the Year. And in the World Series season, he ended up winning the MVP award. But you had great pitching with the Cubs that year. You'd be facing off against 19-game winner John Lester, 2.44 ERA, 18-game winner Jake Arrieta, 3.10 ERA, and Kyle Hendricks, 16 wins. He had Aroldis Chapman. I mean, that guy was throwing like 100 miles an hour. He had a 1.01 ERA. I think he had 15 or 16 saves that year. The offense was solid. They were third in runs, RBIs that year, but kind of in the middle of the pack of batting average and home runs. They weren't like an overly powerful team. But Chris Bryant led the team that year with 39 home runs and a 292 batting average. But you had a more formidable Anthony Rizzo that year and my boy Ben Zobrist from the Rays. But their travels through the postseason, nothing to sneeze at. Beat the Giants, beat the Dodgers pretty handily both series. And then when they won the World Series, they beat Cleveland in 7. And there you have it. It kind of took away all the no more Bartman memories, no more bringing Billy Goats to Wrigley, no more curse of Leon Durham with the misplay. Just a team that everybody seemed to root for, and then once they won, everybody went back to hating them again.
We should have known it was going to happen. Back to the Future 2 told us that in 2015 the Cubs were going to win. So that was not there. The almanac. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah, the old almanac.
So Pat, we come to you here. Paul mentions the curse of the Billy Goat, Steve Bartman. A lot of added pressure on that team. They bring in Joe Madden, who Paul and I have been in Tampa for a long, long time, so we're very familiar with him. I'm not sure if maybe the team won despite him or because of him, because if you see what's happening with the Angels now. But, what are your thoughts on the Chicago Cubs? They were a team of destiny, solid pitching staff again.
Yeah, I think Paul nailed it. There's certain teams that it's almost kind of hard to explain how all the pieces come together, but it did, right? So Theo Epstein obviously had a great run there with the Sox and comes over and builds, a championship club, hires Joe Madden. Of course, Joe, I think was in the kind of the the perfect position to come in after having won and did what he did with Tampa. So, proven commodity there. So when, you think of teams that have great leadership and, you think of the, oh gosh, who's the current manager now? Ross. He was the catcher at that moment. And then you've got him and you've got Zobrist, who was a veteran, who had won and proven himself up. So you had, and then that, the pitching staff just kind of all came together. As Paul mentioned, Arrieta just went off and had a tremendous playoff season. But yeah, I think if there's any one team you can kind of look back on and go, boy, leadership made a difference. It certainly did for the Cubs that year. And, and they put all the pieces together. And I remember correctly too, Paul, that was the series where, was it the Cubs were losing and the rain came? Is that the one where they came back? They had that 2-hour delay and they came back and
total momentum changer.
Yeah, that's right. So you look back and you go, wow, there were just so many crazy, weird things that happened for that all to come together, but it did. It was almost just that magical moment that, if you give me a little attitude here that when God ordains something, it's hard to get in the way of that. So I think that was one of those things where you just go, it's just one of those God ordained things that the Cubs finally got their championship.
Well, and you mentioned God ordains. I bring up Ben Zobrist, man. If you wanted to win in the 2010s, you had to have Ben Zobrist on your team.
That's right. Captain Clutch, man. Right?
Clutch and just under the radar too. Like baseball teams, I think, respected him and knew what he could do. But it's not like he's a household name outside of Tampa and Chicago and a few other places. But great player. Let's move to the 2018 Boston Red Sox.
All right, the Red Sox, led by Alex Cora, 108 and 52. 108 is the sixth highest total of wins ever in a major league season. When you look at this team's lineup, they were very solid from top to bottom. You got Mitch Moreland at first, Eduardo Nunez at second, Alexander Bogaerts at short, Rafael Devers at third. You got Bianchetti in left, Jackie Bradley Jr. in center, Mookie Betts in right, Sandy Leon and Christian Vazquez platooning a catcher. And then you got the powerful JD Martinez at DH. Betts, Martinez, Moreland were all All-Stars. This offense ranked first in runs with 876. They were first in hits. They had the most doubles, third in stolen bases, number one in batting average with a scorching 268, which was 9 points above second place. Betts, he won a Bounty Crown with an average of 348. He also won a Gold Glove and a League MVP award. Martinez was second in average with 330. Martinez was also second in the homers and first RBI, so he was not that far off of the Triple Crown. From the mound, this team was very good as well. You had Rick Porcello, David Price, Chris Sale, Eduardo Rodriguez. They were all double-digit winners, all had losses in the single digits. Sale was an all-star along with Craig Kimbrell out of the bullpen. Seventh best ERA in the entire majors, fourth most Ks. David Price, he had a wonderful story, wonderful comeback player of the year. And then in the postseason, the Sox, they took out the hated Yankees in 4 games, outscoring them 27-14. Next round, they had to face another 100-win team, the Astros, took them out in just 5 games. In the World Series, it was much of the same. They took out the Dodgers in 5, defeating Clayton Kershaw twice. So not too much drama for this team, just pure dominance. 2018 Red Sox.
So Pat, you know what I got to ask you about this one? Did they cheat in your opinions? I mean, I look at the Manfred rolling. We got sending electronic communications to the dugout for stealing signals. What are your thoughts on that?
Man, Michael, I would say that if you weren't cheating that year, you probably weren't trying too hard. I mean, it was just one of those situations, right? I mean, every club is cheating. It's just really who's going to get caught, who does it better than the next club. I mean, it was kind of like the steroid era, right? I mean, if you really were serious back then at hitting 40 or 50 home runs and you weren't taking steroids, you're out of luck. So yeah, it's if you think about that 2018 Red Sox team, probably not a more complete team in baseball, right? And I'm talking probably in decades. and they put it all together. Again, great leadership, throughout the clubhouse, a lot of great veteran presence, but you also had some of those young rising stars that Brian talked about, like Bogarts, that just, came in and had tremendous seasons. And so, yeah, that was a dominant performance. And it was almost one of those situations where you had a little doubt as Boston progressed through the season that this was going to be a World Series type team. And then the way they dominated the playoffs, I mean, it was just absolute domination. So, yeah, I think one of the better teams, obviously, that we've seen last few decades.
So a question I want to ask you, Corey, with these Red Sox is they win the World Series in 2018, and then we come back and look at them in 2019. Not a very good year for them. I know Joey Cora, the manager, was suspended. I mean, does the manager make that much of a difference, or were there just other factors maybe, in your opinion?
Well, I think managers do make a difference. And I think that, Cora has been described as a really great players coach, and so when you have a shakeup like that, and it can really shake the foundation for a lot of those players. And it was just one of those shocking things, that occurs. And a team, if they don't recover quickly, sometimes that can really lag and really have an effect on a team for much longer. And I think that's what we saw with the Red Sox. So, it was just one of those shocking situations. I don't think the players were well prepared for, and they didn't handle it.
Well, let's move to our final team tonight. That's going to be the 2019 Washington Nationals. So I picked the wild card team here tonight. I like to call them the comeback kids. Record of 93-69 during the regular season, which isn't spectacular, but it was enough to get them in. Managed by Dave Martinez. So let me jump right to the playoffs here. Winner take all, one game, wild card game against the Brewers to actually, technically get into the playoffs. So they're down 3-1 in the bottom of the ninth against all-star closer Josh Hader, and they score 3 runs and win. Huge comeback. Then we go to the second round. They're taking on the number 1 seeded Dodgers, probably the number 1 payroll in baseball, if I'm recalling correctly, Dodgers. They're down 2-1 in the 5-game series. They win game 4 at home, and in game 5, they score 2 in the 8th inning to tie it, and then they win it in extra innings with a 4-run 10th. Another comeback. Then they sweep the Cardinals, so that went pretty easy for them, and then they take on the 2017 cheating World Series winners. I'm just throwing it out there, the Houston Astros. So they're down 3-2 in this 7-game series. They go on the road. They steal game 6 and game 7, coming from behind in both games. They win them both. They win the World Series. All of you talked about starting pitching. You can't mention the Nationals without talking starting pitching. Strasburg was 18-6 that year. Another guy that was mentioned earlier, Scherzer, he was on this team now. It was a 2.92 ERA. Corbin had a .667 win percentage. They were 8th combined in team ERA. So just a great pitching staff. I mean, they could hit too. They got Juan Soto. That's been a big name after the trade deadline this year in baseball, of course. Anthony Redden, 34 homers. Him and Soto both had over 30 homers. Trey Turner and Victor Robles, these guys could steal 63 stolen bases. So they had some speed, which is something you don't see too much of anymore. And then they had Rendon at 319 batting average and Howie Kendrick at 344 batting average coming off the bench. So I think they had a good combination of hitting and pitching. I think they got hot at the right time. I think that was a big part of them winning it. So, but I like comeback stories. So that's why I picked the Washington Nationals tonight. So Pat, just an amazing pitching staff. Strasburg was at his peak, I think, at that point, and as was Scherzer. So what are your thoughts on the Nationals closing out the 2010s there and just their team in general?
Yeah, Michael, I think you picked a great one. It's, you think about teams that you said it exactly right. Teams that get hot at the right time. We always see that in the playoffs, right? And some of those teams don't win the World Series, but this one did. I mean, the 2019 Washington Nationals was probably one of the more exciting teams we've seen in baseball history in terms of the way they came back consistently in those games. And yeah, I think it was, you could almost say, one of the more unlikely World Series winners in World Series history. But wow, what a spectacular way that they did it, and I found myself rooting for them at the end, towards the end of the World Series, just thinking, wow, look what these guys were able to accomplish. And again, that great blend of veteran presence, especially with the pitching staff, and then some of those young stars that came up, especially at the end of the season, and performed so brilliantly. Going back to Soto, but there were a couple of other role players that had tremendous playoff series and propelled that team. So yeah, really exciting team to watch and a lot of fun. So this is a tough one tonight. You guys have a good battle. This is good.
And another one where they weren't picked to win in the World Series. Obviously, Houston coming off a title 2 years ago, and they were still very good in 2018. Were picked to win that series. So upset there. So let's move into our vote tonight, guys. As usual, cannot vote for your own. Brian, you got first vote tonight.
Well, yeah, I think that the added pressure that the Cubs had to face, I mean, with all that tradition in their face, all the the curse, all that stuff, I feel like that one just jumps out to me as just a more impressive feat for them to win the World Series. So I'm gonna go with the Cubs.
Okay, Scott.
I can't go with those Red Sox because of Alex Cora in his Houston days. I'm gonna go with the old Nationals, the old Montreal Expos. Let's go with the Nationals.
Okay. Paul.
I don't know. I don't feel love towards any of these. I like the argument you put with the Nationals. I feel sorry for you tonight, so I guess I'll go with your Nationals.
Jeez.
Thanks.
It is
Thanks. I
better.
appreciate
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So
It
Nationals can't
is
win now, Michael.
sympathy. Yeah, it's sympathy.
despite the fact that I'm wearing a Red Sox hat tonight, which I got at a garage sale for 50 cents, trying to
Too
expand
much.
my hats here,
Paid
but
too much for it.
I'm not picking the Red Sox tonight. I love the Giants, and if I was picking team of the decade, I would pick the Giants, but I have to also go with the team of destiny tonight, which is the Chicago Cubs. I guess throw a little love to Paul since he was throwing it to me. Scott, I think I voted for your team on our last World Series show, so I can move on from that. But so that gives us 2 each. Pat, you can break the tie, or you can vote for one of the other teams.
Oh man,
No pressure.
golly, yeah. I love each of the stories is great, right? You got the Giants, which was just a tremendous team and great pitching, and obviously the Nationals was just a fun team to watch and did some amazing things. The Red Sox, obviously that dominating year. But I'm with you. I think I'm going to go with the Cubs tonight. I think that was a team of destiny that they broke all those curses, and what a way to do it. The way they did it was a lot of fun. And I just remember, David Ross talking about after that series. Remember that I'll never forget that interview with how much he talked about the love of that team and how they just embraced each other and felt like they were going to overcome all these obstacles, and they did it. And he gave one of the more memorable post-game speeches I've ever heard, and not a surprise he's managing today, right? So yeah, I'll go with the Cubs.
So a win for the 2016 Chicago Cubs. That's for you, Paul. Paul, I am going to give you first question, but I want to ask Pat here about his book real quick. So tell us about your book, More Than the Score, how parents and coaches can cultivate virtue in youth athletes, and where people can buy it.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I appreciate that. Yeah, it was during COVID, I had a little bit more time on my hands, and I had called a friend of mine he's a current author, and I was just running some ideas by him. I said, hey, I've got a book I think you should write. And he said, well, tell me about it. Tell me your ideas. And so after about 10 minutes, he stopped me and said, no, Pat, you're going to write this book. I said, well, dude, I'm not an author. I don't even know where to start. How do you write a book, right? So he said, no. He goes, listen, everything you're bringing up, the subject of helping parents and coaches really keep their focus on the right things, keep their perspective on why sports is such an incredible platform to teach kids, and to teach them the things of life, the character skills, all the things that I'm sure all of you guys learn, playing sports. And if you have, good coaches or great coaches, man, there's things that we took away from the game that I know have helped me for the rest of my life. Whether I look back at being what a great team player looks like, or how to sacrifice for the betterment of the team and your teammates. just all the character things I learned that have helped me become a better husband, a better dad, a better coworker. So it's things I learned on the sports fields that now I can attribute to successes later in life here. So I felt like, as I've continued coaching youth baseball, I still coach an elite team here, the Dallas Patriots, in the area that I live in, and it's a national elite travel team. I mean, we play all the big tournaments and stuff, but I've really noticed this shift over the last probably 15 to 20 years to more importance placed on the scoreboard, more importance placed on getting my kid a scholarship, so I've got to showcase my kid's talents. It seems like there's just more pressures around the game than what I had when I was a kid. And I just wanted to write about our experiences, my wife and I, Christina, raising our three sons, Carson, Connor, and Casey. And, we felt like as parents, we made a few mistakes along the way, but we did a lot of things right. And I've had more parents ask me, how did you guys negotiate all this crazy club ball and travel ball? And your kids have kind of made it out okay. They're all, pretty successful now and doing well. And I said, well, these are the same stories I keep telling. Why don't I just write them down? And that's where the idea for the book came. And my buddy Kent Evans helped me to get it done. And so here we are. But yeah, just really a lot of my experiences, and I share a lot of the stories of what our boys went through and what we did to help them, try to keep the right perspective on the game and learn the things now that they're applying in their lives.
And I assume you can get on Amazon, and I did see it on Amazon earlier. So
yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Barnes and Nobles and all the whatnots.
Yeah, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, any major bookseller, retailer, you can find it. And I think when we launched it, it climbed up to a #1 seller on Amazon. So that was really cool to see, in that particular category, parents who I think were hungry for that type of information. So it's been a great success, and just really appreciate the people who have read it.
Excellent. So we're gonna go Paul, Scott, Brian.
Pat, I was reacquainting myself with some of your stats and career, and you can blame Casey, your son, for posting this and reminded me about this. But Mets game 1990. I watched this again. It's been years since I've seen it, but man, it looks like somebody's fast forwarding through this video. As soon as you hit Doc Gooden, he is coming at you, and as soon as he steps forward, you're coming off the mound. Did that go the way you expected that to go, or was that just a heat of the moment thing there?
Yeah, Paul. Well, you guys probably you've seen enough brawls to know that usually something starts that some precipitates it, right? And so and Doc wasn't known as a headhunter. He I think was known more as a guy who would knock guys off the plate for a purpose. But yeah, we were in Shea Stadium that night. They were in a playoff hunt. We were not, but they were, every game meant something to them. And we got off to a great start against Doc. I think we built a 3-0 lead. I think at that time when the brawl occurred, it was maybe 3-1, but yeah, so we had hit a couple of home runs. And then he, I think, was really trying to brush Tommy Herr back and then hit him in the ribs. And the next inning, John Kruk hits a home run, and then Dickie Thon got hit. If you guys remember the Dickie Thon story, his career almost ended with that Mike Torres fastball to his eye when he was playing with the Astros.
Right,
so,
right.
Yeah, Dickie was always really sensitive with pitches inside, and if he got hit, man, it was almost guaranteed he would think somebody was throwing at him. So, but he got back to the dugout, and he was hot. He was really hot because both times the brushback pitches that got away, I think, from Doc hit our guys, and it was after home runs. So, it was with Doc leading off the 5th inning. Our manager, Jim Fergosi, said, "Hey, he's leading off. Let's go ahead and take care of him first pitch." I did make a play though. I said, "Hey, Jimmy, we're winning. Do you think we can come back and maybe hit him in the 7th?" He goes, "No, let's not take the chance. He may not be in the 7th." So, I was trying to delay it at least so we could try to get the win. But so that's, the duty of any pitcher is to protect his players, and so I knew that was what I needed to do, but I also was never going to try to injure an opposing player, try to hit him up high or anything like that. So I did aim at his hip, And yeah, you can see, I think, Paul, you saw right when I was throwing the pitch, he was pretty much ready for it. He started coming out. So and my plan was to meet him halfway because, I mean, if you remember back, you know, Darren Dalton was pretty big dude. And
Yeah.
so I mean, I think obviously we all anticipated what was going to happen. And so I met Doc halfway and I saw Dutch right on his tail. And I thought, man, he's going to hit both of us and clobber both of us. So I went low to try to tackle or wrap up Doc. And then, of course, Darren got on top of him and got, I think, 5 or 6 licks on his head before the benches got there. So, yeah, Doc definitely got the brunt of that one.
Pat, I got a question about way back in the 1988 Baseball World Cup. Remember playing in that, pitching in that?
Oh, and you meant the Olympics?
No, it was they called the World Cup. You played Cuba in the gold medal game.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's prior to the Olympics. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
just prior to the Olympics, you had Jim Abbott, Tino Martinez, Robin Ventura all on your team.
That's right. Yeah.
What do you playing Cuba must have been amazing. I know the results weren't what you wanted, but tell us something about playing Cuba in '88 and what those games were like.
Yeah, it was really incredible, Scott. And that was obviously the World Cup for them was their Olympics because that was the year that Cuba boycotted the Seoul Olympics. So we met in the World Cup in Italy, and yeah, we both got to the final game, obviously, for the gold medal there. And this was the tournament just before you fly over to Seoul to play in the Olympic Games. So it was really our kind of a tune-up for us, but it was, you know, everything for them. And we had a lead going into the 9th inning. Cuba tied it in the 9th, and then it ended up beating us in extra innings. So it was an incredible game, back and forth all night. And it was interesting that when we started the game, a lot of the fans were rooting for Cuba, and by the end of the game, they had kind of turned and started rooting for us. There were a couple of bad calls that occurred that went against us, and so the fans kind of came around to rooting for us at the end of the game, and it was kind of a pretty surreal feeling. But yeah, and I'll remember the post game was even a bit more interesting too. So, you know, we lose in extra innings. It was just a hard fought, you know, very emotional game. And the Cuban players come right over to our dugout, waving the Cuban flag right in front of our dugout. And Billy Massey takes off out of the dugout. And I think it took 3 or 4 of us to tackle him to not start an international incident there in Italy. Yeah, that would have been bad going right into the Olympics, right? So yeah, so it was a great series. That Cuban team, they probably had 5 or 6 players that would have easily been major leaguers. And in fact, a couple of them ended up defecting and came over. You remember Levon Hernandez had a great, you know, split finger fastball, had a great career. Omar Linares, their third baseman, I think would have been an all-star in the major leagues. This guy was just unbelievable. They had, you know, some guys that had been around a while. They had a guy named Kindelon that was their first baseman that I think he hit, you know, 40, 50 home runs a year in amateur games, you know, so-called amateur games. But yeah, just a great team, a great experience. Yeah, and you know, kind of flashback to when we went over in '87 and played Cuba on their home soil. We were the first American team to play in Havana in 27 years, and we actually won 2 out of 5 games against them on their home soil. And so we went into that game in Italy thinking, you know, this was kind of the rematch of that series, and unfortunately we came out on the losing end. But you know, those games, that series with the Cubans in Havana, that game in Italy, I mean, we went into the Olympics thinking, you know, we can play with the greatest team in international ball at that time. The Cubans dominated international play, and we knew going into the Olympics after having played them the way we did that we were ready to go. We were ready to win a gold medal.
So we'll get you out of here with this tonight. Analytics, one of your things that you're very good at. Are there any players that we would know that maybe you would like run analytics on or scouted in, whether it's football or baseball? And what are your thoughts on analytics? Do you think that it's maybe, well, it's definitely changed the way the game is played, but do you think maybe it's good for the game or bad for the game?
Yeah, Michael. So to clarify, I've been working on the behavioral analytics field for about 25 years. And so, yeah, when I was done playing ball, I met a guy who was a research guy, a psychotherapist by trade in College Station, Texas, of all places. And he had this tool that was behavioral in nature. it's 360 base. So it's, you would take it on yourself, but you'd have also teammates and coaches, other people that know you take it on you as well. And so when I went through it, I was pretty fascinated by the results. I'd never had anybody give me feedback the way this guy did. And so I was interested enough to go, wow, this is pretty cool. I think, a lot of application in sports. And I took it to the guy I felt like, would help me to figure if it had value or not. So went out to California, met with my buddy, Tom House, and Tom put a couple of players through it. And he said, man, where'd you find this thing? This is really an incredible tool. It's going to help me as a coach with the guys that I'm helping develop. It's going to just speed that process up because I'll now kind of know what's underneath the hood behaviorally to help them make adjustments. And so we began running the profiles on guys like Tom Brady and Drew Brees and Matt Ryan. And so we started out with quarterbacks. That's who Tom House had been working with at that time. We ran it on a number of pitchers as well. And so we started working with these guys, and it was amazing the results that we were getting. And I'll never forget sitting down with Tom House, and he's ran Tom Brady through it, and we sat down and he's going over the data with Brady, and and he's kind of pushing back on a couple of things, and it was funny the way Tom House handled it. He said, well, TB, look, this is not my data. This is not what I'm telling you. This is your data on you, and this is also your teammates and your coaching staff. So, I just want to know what you want to do about it. And so it was really kind of cool to hear, these high performing athletes see some data that could really help them move the needle in terms of their performance. And that's what we started doing. So we had some success there, and I just took it to some clubs and said, look, it's to me, there's, when you guys are looking at personality profiles, tell me how that's helping you evaluate players. And they can never get to the point where they say, yeah, this is really what's going to help bottom line performance, help a guy improve. All they were doing was getting more information about a particular player, but it really wasn't telling them, I think, the right things to help them move the dial in terms of performance. So we started doing analytics with draft analysis, and we took it to the NFL, did some of that work with the Cowboys and some other clubs there. And then we've worked with about a dozen Major League Baseball teams. So, and I think that the great issue is obviously is player development. Once you draft that player, how are you going to help them improve and get to the big leagues? And what you often find is it's not the competency side, it's not the talent side that keep these players from getting to that ultimate goal. It's their behavior. And so there's certain behaviors that they do well, and there's certain things that get in their way. And we started labeling those constraints. And so what we're trying to do is help players identify those constraints early on and develop a plan to work through those constraints so that they can get to their goals.
Excellent. Well, we want to thank you, Pat, for coming on tonight. We appreciate you being here.
Michael, it's been a pleasure, man. Really enjoyed the roundabout with you guys on the teams, and yeah, thank you again for talking about my book and then allowing me to talk about team analytics. It's been a blast to be with you guys.
Awesome. And I want to remind everybody, hit that subscribe button on whatever you're listening on, and be sure to pick up that book of Pat's here, More Than the Score: How Parents and Coaches Can Culture Virtue in Youth Athletes. So make sure you pick that up wherever you guys can find it. Thank you for watching. We'll see everyone next time. Have a great night.